Hangman. The word echoed through courtroom 4B like a slap, followed by Judge Franklin Pemberton's theatrical laughter. Your dog tags say Hangman. What is this, Halloween? The gallery snickered on cue, just as Pemberton knew they would. 22 years on the bench had taught him exactly how to work a room, how to remind every defendant who held the power, who dispensed the judgment, who determined whether they walked free or spent the night in a cell. He adjusted his rimless glasses and leaned forward, savoring the moment. The man standing at the defendant's podium did not react. He simply stood there in a donated suit jacket that hung too large on his thin frame, a yellow dress shirt buttoned to the collar without a tie, and boots held together with electrical tape that the judge could not see from his elevated position. His hands were clasped in front of him, weight evenly distributed, spine straight. Parade rest, though no one in the courtroom recognized it for what it was. Cornelius Birchwood was 68 years old. His face was weathered like cracked leather, silver stubble scattered across hollow cheeks, pale blue eyes that held steady on some middle distance. He had not eaten in 2 days. He had walked 4 miles to the courthouse that morning because he could not afford the bus fare. And he had been arrested 3 nights ago for the crime of trying to stay warm in the vestibule of the public library during the coldest snap of the winter. Pemberton was still performing. He held up the arrest report with 2 fingers, as if it might contaminate him. Trespassing. Failure to vacate when instructed by authorities. And what do we have here in the personal effects inventory? 1 set of dog tags claiming the name Cornelius Birchwood, United States Marine Corps, and beneath that, the word Hangman scratched in the metal like some kind of prison tattoo. He let the report drop onto his desk with a theatrical flourish. Mr. Birchwood, do you think this is a game? Do you think wearing military props to court will earn you sympathy from this bench? The public defender, a young woman named Angela Reyes Morrison, who had been assigned the case 5 minutes before the hearing, rose to her feet. Your Honor, if I may, my client's military service has not been verified, but neither has it been disproven. Perhaps we could simply proceed to the matter at hand. Pemberton silenced her with a wave of his manicured hand. Sit down, counselor. I'll determine what's relevant in my courtroom. He turned his attention back to Birchwood, eyes gleaming with the particular pleasure of a man who has found his morning's entertainment. So tell me, Mr. Birchwood, Hangman, what exactly does that mean? Were you some kind of executioner in the military? Did you hang people? The gallery laughed again. In the back row, a law student named Derek Okonkwo shifted uncomfortably. His brother was currently serving in the Marines overseas. Something about the old man's bearing bothered him. He took out his phone, held it low, and began to record. Birchwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, hoarse from disuse, but it carried through the courtroom with surprising clarity. They're not props, Your Honor. Pemberton's smile widened. Of course not. Let me guess. You were a Navy SEAL. No, wait, Delta Force. Or perhaps with a name like Hangman, you were some kind of special executioner. Tell me, Mr. Birchwood, did you execute anyone? The laughter died before it could fully form. Something in the air shifted. Perhaps it was the way the old man's eyes finally moved, lifting from that middle distance to meet the judge's gaze directly. Perhaps it was the absolute stillness that came over him, the stillness of a man who has learned to become invisible, to disappear into the landscape, to wait for hours without moving a single muscle. Yes, Your Honor. Birchwood's voice did not waver. I did. The silence stretched. Pemberton recovered quickly, waving his hand dismissively, but some of the theatrical pleasure had drained from his performance. Delusions of grandeur. I see it all the time with men like you. You want sympathy. You want people to think you're something special instead of just another vagrant who couldn't follow simple rules about where to sleep. Near the side door, Bailiff Marcus Coleman straightened slightly. He was 44 years old, built like a linebacker gone slightly soft around the middle, and he had spent 8 years in the United States Marine Corps before joining the sheriff department. Something about the defendant bothered him. Not his words, not his appearance, but something deeper. The way he stood, the way his weight was distributed, the way his hands stayed perfectly still while everyone else in the room fidgeted and shifted. Coleman had seen men stand like that before. Men who had been trained to be weapons. Men who had learned patience measured not in minutes, but in hours. His eyes narrowed, studying the old man more closely. The scar at the temple, a thin line running from eyebrow toward ear. The steadiness of his hands, not trembling the way a malnourished, homeless man's hands should tremble, but rock solid. A sniper's hands. Pemberton was still talking, his voice filling the courtroom, but Coleman had stopped listening. He was watching, remembering. 20 years ago, Fallujah, November 2004. The longest night of his life, pinned behind a collapsed wall while rounds snapped overhead. Watching a clock tower where muzzle flashes kept appearing like a heartbeat. Watching insurgent positions go silent one by one. The Hangman. They had never learned his real name. He was just a legend, a ghost story they told each other. The sniper who held the tower for 19 hours while his spotter bled out beside him. The angel of death who hung over them, protecting them, saving them. If you're watching this story from anywhere in the world right now, drop a comment below telling us where you're joining us from. Stories of hidden heroes like this one exist in every community, in every city, perhaps even in your own neighborhood. A quiet legend whose humble appearance hides an extraordinary story of service. If accounts of courage and sacrifice speak to you, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support helps us share more of these incredible true stories about the forgotten warriors among us. Now, let us continue. Pemberton slammed his gavel. I am ordering you to remove those dog tags, Mr. Birchwood. This is a court of law, not a costume party. I will not have military theater disrupting my proceedings. Birchwood's hand moved to his chest, touching the tags through his shirt. Muscle memory. Sacred objects. He did not move to remove them. Did you hear me? Pemberton's face reddened. Remove them. Now, or I will hold you in contempt and have Bailiff Coleman remove them for you. Coleman felt his stomach drop. The judge had just given him an order he was not sure he could follow. Because if this man was who Coleman was beginning to think he was, then removing those tags would be like asking a priest to surrender his crucifix. Like asking a widow to give up her wedding ring. Birchwood's voice came soft and steady. With respect, Your Honor, I would prefer not to. This is not a negotiation. Pemberton was nearly shouting now, his composure cracking. This is my courtroom. You will comply, or you will face the consequences. But what Judge Franklin Pemberton did not know, what no one in that courtroom yet understood except for one man now frozen at the bailiff station with 20 years of memory flooding back, was that in exactly 11 minutes, the word hangman would be spoken again in this room. But this time it would not be spoken with mockery. It would be spoken with reverence. And the man who spoke it would be weeping. The courtroom seemed to pulse with tension as Pemberton's words hung in the air. But Cornelius Birchwood was no longer entirely present. His body remained at the defendant's podium, spine straight, hands clasped, but his mind had drifted to where it always drifted when the world pressed too hard against him. Back to the morning. Back to the ritual that kept him tethered to something resembling sanity. He had woken at 0545 beneath the Meridian Street overpass, same as every morning for the past 3 years. His body clock was more reliable than any alarm. Decades of military discipline burned into his bones so deeply that even homelessness could not erase it. The concrete had been cold, the kind of cold that seeps through sleeping bags and blankets and settles into aging joints like a permanent resident. But he had risen without complaint, folded his olive green military blanket with hospital corners precise enough to pass any inspection, and packed his few possessions into the worn rucksack that had traveled with him through 3 wars. The rucksack contained everything that mattered. 2 sets of dog tags, his own and the ones he had removed from Terrence Washington's body on that tower in Fallujah. A laminated photograph of Lorraine on their wedding day, her smile so bright it still hurt to look at after all these years. Another laminated photograph of Marisol at her nursing school graduation, taken from across the street because he had not been able to bring himself to attend, to intrude on her achievement with his brokenness. And a worn paperback copy of The Old Man and the Sea, the book Lorraine had been reading when she died, her bookmark still in place on page 87 where she had stopped forever. He had walked the 2.3 miles to the Veterans Memorial in the gray pre-dawn light, his boots held together with electrical tape and hope. The same route every day, past the closed storefronts and the early morning delivery trucks, past a coffee shop where warmth and the smell of fresh pastries leaked out onto the sidewalk like a taunt, past the bus stop where people waited with their phones and their normal lives and their complete inability to see him. The memorial sat in a small plaza between the courthouse and the library. Black granite walls etched with names, organized by conflict and date. Flags hanging limp in the windless morning. Benches worn smooth by mourners. He had arrived at exactly 0600, same as always, and walked directly to Section 7, Row 34. The name was there. It was always there. Terence Ed Washington. He had pressed his fingers to the cold stone, tracing the letters he knew by heart. To Bird, 22 years old, forever. From Detroit. Wanted to be a history teacher. Drove a 1979 Firebird he had restored with his father. Took a sniper's round through the throat on hour 16 of the longest operation of Birchwood's life and died in 90 seconds with blood bubbling from his lips. His last words of command that Birchwood had followed for 3 more hours with the young man's body cooling beside him. Still here, brother. Birchwood had whispered it like a prayer. Still trying. He had told the bird about the cold snap, about the library vestibule, about the police officer who had arrested him with something almost like apology in his eyes. He told him about seeing Marisol through the hospital window last week, laughing with her colleagues in the break room, looking healthy and happy and whole. He told him that was enough. That had to be enough. That he could not intrude on her life with his failures, his brokenness, his inability to exist in a world that no longer made sense without Lorraine in it. The memorial groundskeeper had appeared as he always did, an old Vietnamese man named Mr. Pham who never asked questions and never offered platitudes. He had simply handed Birchwood a cup of coffee, black, steaming in the cold morning air. 2 years of this ritual between them. No words necessary. Some debts do not require explanation. Some kindnesses do not require acknowledgement. They simply exist, small lights in the darkness, proof that humanity persists even in its broken corners. Birchwood had stayed until 0730, then walked to the courthouse to answer for his crime of seeking warmth. Now he stood before a judge who saw nothing but a vagrant, a nuisance, a clog in the machinery of justice. The memory of Tabird's face swam before him, young and eager, and so certain that the world would make sense if you just followed the rules and did your duty. The memory of Lorraine's face, pale against hospital pillows, her hand growing cold in his even as he begged her not to leave. The memory of Marisol as a little girl, sitting on his lap while he pointed out constellations in the night sky, before 3 wars and 20 years of service had carved him into something she could barely recognize. Pemberton was still talking. His voice washed over Birchwood like noise, like static, like the distant rumble of artillery that had once been the soundtrack of his existence. The judge was demanding something, threatening something. The words contempt and consequences floated through the air, but they meant nothing. Birchwood had faced contempt from enemies who wanted him dead. He had faced consequences measured in blood and bone and brothers who never came home. What was a judge compared to that? What was a courtroom compared to a clock tower in Fallujah with rounds snapping past, and a dying friend gurgling commands through a ruined throat? Keep shooting, Gunny. Tabird's voice echoed across 20 years. Do not stop for me. He had not stopped. Not then. Not in the years since. He kept moving, kept breathing, kept waking at 0545 and folding his blanket with hospital corners and walking to the memorial to speak with the dead. That was its own kind of shooting, its own kind of mission. Survival as tribute, existence as honor. But sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, he wondered if Tabird would be disappointed in what he had become. A homeless man in a donated suit, standing before a judge who saw nothing but failure. A father who had abandoned his daughter because he could not bear to see her mother's eyes looking back at him. A husband who had let his wife die alone in a hospital room while he screamed at doctors who could do nothing. The judge's gavel cracked against wood, sharp as a rifle shot. Birchwood's hand twitched toward a weapon that was not there, 20 years of muscle memory firing before conscious thought could intervene. No one noticed. No one ever noticed. He was invisible in the way that only the broken and discarded can be invisible, seen but not perceived, present but not acknowledged. Bailiff Coleman noticed. From his position near the side door, Coleman watched the old man's hand twitch and recognized the motion instantly. A combat réflexe, the instinctive reach for a sidearm that was not there. He had seen it in veterans at the grocery store when a car backfired. He had seen it in himself, in the early years after coming home, when the world was too loud and too bright and too full of threats that existed only in memory. This man had seen combat, real combat, the kind that rewires your nervous system and never fully lets you go. Coleman's eyes moved to the scar at the defendant's temple, the thin line running from eyebrow toward ear. A bullet graze. He had seen enough of them to know. His gaze dropped to the man's hands, steady as stone despite the malnourishment evident in his hollow cheeks. Sniper's hands. The hands of a man who had learned to control his heartbeat, his breathing, his every microscopic movement in service of placing a round exactly where it needed to go. The pieces were assembling themselves in Coleman's mind, forming a picture he was not yet ready to believe. The age was right. The bearing was right. The scar at the temple, in exactly the location where legend said the hangman had taken a round on hour 14. It cannot be him. It cannot possibly be him. But Coleman's hands had begun to tremble anyway. Judge Pemberton had found his rhythm again. The momentary silence following Birchwood's admission that yes, he had executed people, had unsettled him, but only briefly. Men like Pemberton did not stay unsettled for long. They had too much practice reshaping reality to fit their assumptions, too many years of bending the world to match their expectations. He lifted the arrest report again, holding it at arm's length as if studying a particularly offensive piece of evidence. Let me read this aloud for the record. On the night of January 14th, at approximately 0312 hours, the defendant was discovered in the vestibule of the Hadley County Public Library. When asked to vacate the premises by security personnel, the defendant refused, stating that he was, and I quote, just trying to get warm. Pemberton let the report fall to his desk with theatrical disgust. Just trying to get warm. As if the rest of us are not cold too, Mr. Birchwood. As if the rest of us do not have to follow rules about where we can and cannot sleep. As if your comfort supersedes the law. The gallery stirred. Some nodded in agreement with the judge's assessment. Others shifted uncomfortably, uncertain whether this level of contempt was appropriate for a trespassing charge. In the back row, Derek Okonkwo kept his phone steady, capturing every word. Birchwood said nothing. He had learned decades ago that silence was its own weapon, its own shield. Words could be twisted, misinterpreted, used against you. Silence simply was. Pemberton leaned forward, sensing resistance he intended to break. I have seen 100 men like you, Mr. Birchwood. 1,000. You come into my courtroom with your hard luck stories and your claims of service and your expectation that society owes you something. But I see through it. I see the truth beneath the costume. He gestured at Birchwood's donated suit, his taped boots, his weathered face. You know what I see? I see a man who gave up. A man who decided that following rules was too hard, that contributing to society was too much effort, that it was easier to sleep in library doorways and collect sympathy than to actually work for a living. The military props are a nice touch, I will admit. Very convincing, but props nonetheless. Angela Riz Morrison rose again, her young face flushed with frustration. Your Honor, this characterization is entirely speculative. My client has not been given the opportunity to verify or present evidence of his service record. If we could simply proceed to sentencing on the trespassing charge without the editorial commentary. Pemberton's eyes flashed with irritation. Sit down, counselor. I will conduct this hearing as I see fit. He turned back to Birchwood, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But since your attorney raises the question of evidence, let us discuss these dog tags of yours. You claim they are real. You claim that ridiculous name scratched into the metal means something. So prove it. He pointed a manicured finger at Birchwood's chest. Take them off and hand them to Bailiff Coleman for inspection. Let us see what we are dealing with here. If they are genuine military issue, I am sure the bailiff can verify it. He was a Marine himself. Were you not, Coleman? Every head in the courtroom turned toward the bailiff. Coleman stood frozen near the side door, his face a careful mask that concealed the turmoil beneath. Yes, Your Honor. 8 years. 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. Pemberton nodded with satisfaction. There we have it. A real Marine can examine these supposed dog tags and tell us whether they are legitimate or purchased from some surplus store for $5. Mr. Birchwood, remove the tags and hand them over. The courtroom waited. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, one tube flickering in the corner with an irregular rhythm that set teeth on edge. The American flag hung limp beside the state flag, colors muted in the artificial light. The clock on the wall showed 9:52, each tick audible in the heavy silence. Birchwood's hand moved to his chest, not to remove the tags, but to touch them through the fabric of his shirt. A gesture of connection, of reassurance, of anchoring himself to something real in a world that had long since stopped making sense. These tags, he said quietly, are not props. His voice carried despite its softness, reaching every corner of the courtroom. Evelyn Tran, the court reporter, found her fingers hovering motionless over her stenograph keys. Something in the old man's tone had changed. The resignation was still there, the weariness, but beneath it lay something harder. Something forged in fires that this climate-controlled courtroom could never understand. These tags, Birchwood continued, have been around my neck for 47 years. Through Beirut in 1983, when I pulled bodies from rubble while the buildings still burned. Through Kuwait in 1991, when the sky turned black with oil fires and the highway was paved with the dead. Through Mogadishu in 1993, when I earned my first Silver Star dragging wounded rangers through streets that wanted us dead. Pemberton opened his mouth to interrupt, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the absolute stillness that had fallen over the courtroom. Perhaps it was the expression on Bailiff Coleman's face, which had gone from professional neutrality to something approaching shock. Birchwood was not finished. And through Fallujah in 2004, November 10th and 11th, Operation Phantom Fury, when I climbed a clock tower in the Jolin district and did not come down for 19 hours. Coleman made a sound. Not quite a word, not quite a gasp. Something between recognition and disbelief. His hand moved unconsciously to the wall beside him, steadying himself against something he was not yet ready to accept. Birchwood's pale blue eyes found the bailiff's face, held there for a moment that stretched like taffy. "You were there, were you not?" he said. It was not a question. Kilo Company. Behind the wall, on Abu Ghraib Street. I remember the position. I remember the rounds coming from the building to your east. I remember eliminating that threat at approximately 0340 hours. Coleman's professional composure shattered. His voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. That was you. You were the one in the tower. Pemberton slammed his gavel against the bench, the sharp crack echoing like gunfire. Order. I will have order in this courtroom. Bailiff Coleman, control yourself. This is a hearing, not a reunion. But Coleman was no longer listening to the judge. He was staring at the old man in the donated suit, seeing past the hollow cheeks and the weathered skin to something beneath. The bearing, the stillness, the scar at the temple where a bullet had grazed flesh and bone and somehow failed to kill the man behind it. The hangman. Coleman's lips formed the word like a prayer, like a name spoken in church. We never knew your real name. We just called you the hangman because you hung over us all night. Every time we thought we were going to die, another shot came from that tower and another enemy stopped shooting. Pemberton's gavel came down again, harder this time. I said order. Whatever fantasy you two are constructing, it ends now. Mr. Birchwood, remove those tags immediately or I will hold you in contempt. Birchwood looked at the judge, looked at Coleman, looked at the gallery of faces, watching with expressions ranging from confusion to fascination to the beginnings of understanding. Then his hands moved to the chain around his neck, and slowly, deliberately, he pulled the dog tags free from beneath his yellowed shirt. There were two sets, his own, and another pair that was darker, older, stained with something that might once have been blood. He held them out toward Coleman, and the bailiff approached on unsteady legs to take them with trembling hands. Coleman held the dog tags in his hands like holy relics, afraid to grip too tightly, afraid to let go. The metal was warm from decades of contact with skin, worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. He read the first set slowly, his lips moving with each word. Birchwood, Corneliusen. The service number. O positive. Catholic. USMC. And beneath the standard information, scratched into the metal with something sharp. The letters crude but clear. Hangman Fallujah 04. His hands began to shake. Not the subtle tremor of nerves, but the full body trembling of a man whose world has suddenly shifted on its axis. He had spent 20 years wondering about the sniper in that tower. 20 years telling the story to his children, to fellow veterans, to anyone who would listen. The hangman saved us. The hangman watched over us all night. The hangman was still firing when they pulled him out at dawn. And now the hangman was standing in a courtroom in a donated suit, being mocked by a judge who saw nothing but a vagrant. Coleman turned his attention to the second set of tags. These were different, darker. The metal had a patina that came from age and something else, something that had seeped into the microscopic grooves and never fully come out. He read the names stamped there and felt his throat constrict. Washington, Tehansel. The service number. A negative. Baptist. USMC. And scratched beneath, in the same crude lettering, to Bird my brother. The spotter. Coleman had heard the stories. Everyone who served in Fallujah had heard the stories. The hangman spotter took a round through the throat on hour 16. The hangman held him while he died, then kept shooting for 3 more hours with the body beside him. When they extracted him at dawn, he would not let go of the body. They had to pry his fingers loose. Coleman looked up at Birchwood, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a homeless man, not a vagrant. A Marine who had carried his dead brother's tags around his neck for 20 years, who had never stopped mourning, who had somehow fallen so far from the legend he once was that he now stood accused of trespassing for trying to survive a cold night. Gunny. Coleman's voice cracked on the rank. Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood. Birchwood met his eyes. The faintest ghost of something that might have been recognition passed across his weathered face. You made it home, Lance Corporal. I am glad. Pemberton's gavel cracked against the bench again, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. What is happening here? This is highly irregular. Bailiff Coleman, return to your post immediately. Whatever this man has told you, whatever claims he has made, they are unverified and irrelevant to the proceedings. Coleman did not move. He stood rooted to the spot, the dog tag still cradled in his trembling hands, his eyes fixed on the old man who had saved his life 2 decades ago. The courtroom had gone utterly silent. Even the flickering fluorescent light seemed to pause, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Evelyn Tran sat frozen at her stenograph, hands suspended over keys she could not bring herself to press. Angela Riz-Morrison had risen halfway from her seat, uncertain whether to intervene or simply bear witness. In the gallery, Derek Okonkwo adjusted his phone slightly, making sure the camera captured everything. Birchwood's mind was no longer in the courtroom. It had traveled back across the years to a city burning beneath him, to a tower that smelled of cordite and blood, to the weight of a rifle that had become an extension of his body. He could feel Bird beside him, young and eager, calling out windage and distance with the precision of a man who believed absolutely in the mission, in the core, in the brother who lay beside him behind the scope. They had climbed that tower in darkness, picking their way through rubble and debris, past the bodies of insurgents who had tried to hold the building before the Marines pushed through. The stairs were half collapsed, forcing them to climb hand over hand in places, their weapons strapped to their backs, vulnerable in ways that made Birchwood's skin crawl. But the position was perfect. 4 stories up, clear sight lines to the streets below, angles on every approach the enemy might use. Tabard had whistled softly when they reached the top, surveying the kill zone spread beneath them like a map. "Gunny, we can cover the whole district from here." Birchwood had nodded, already setting up his M48-3, already calculating distances and wind speeds in the part of his brain that never stopped working. They were supposed to wait for orders. They were supposed to hold position until command decided how to deploy them. But Kilo Company was pinned down 4 blocks east, taking fire from positions they could not see, and Marines were dying while commanders deliberated. He had made the call, disobeyed a direct order to hold, opened fire on the first machine gun nest at 0234, and did not stop until darkness fell again. 23 confirmed kills. 3 airstrikes called in on fortified positions. 46 Marines who went home to their families because death came from above instead of for them. And 1 spotter who never saw 23, whose blood still stained the tags that Coleman now held in shaking hands. The memory dissolved, replaced by the harsh fluorescent reality of Courtroom 4B. Pemberton was still speaking, his voice increasingly shrill, demanding order, demanding compliance, demanding that the world conform to his understanding of how it should work. But the world had stopped listening to Judge Pemberton. Coleman turned to face the bench, squaring his shoulders in a way that transformed him from bailiff to Marine in the span of a heartbeat. "Your Honor, with respect, you need to stop talking." Pemberton's face went scarlet. "Excuse me? How dare you speak to me that way in my own courtroom? You are a bailiff. You work for this court. You will show proper respect, or I will have you removed and your employment terminated." Coleman did not flinch. He had faced insurgents with automatic weapons. He had crawled through streets littered with IEDs. He had spent one endless night certain he was going to die, sustained only by the steady crack of a rifle from a tower overhead. A judge's anger was nothing. "Sir," Coleman said, his voice steady now, hardened by certainty. "This man is Gunnery Sergeant Cornelius Birchwood, United States Marine Corps, retired. He held a clock tower in Fallujah for 19 hours while his spotter died beside him. He saved 46 Marines that day, including me. And you have spent the last 20 minutes mocking him for wearing the tags of his dead brother." The words fell into the courtroom like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward, touching every person present, changing the shape of everything they thought they understood about what they were witnessing. Pemberton opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in 22 years on the bench, Judge Franklin Ashworth Pemberton III had absolutely nothing to say. The silence in courtroom 4B had taken on a physical weight, pressing down on every person present like a hand against the chest. Pemberton sat frozen behind his elevated bench, his gavel forgotten in his grip, his mouth working soundlessly as he tried to formulate a response to words that had shattered every assumption he had carried into this hearing. In the gallery, the reactions rippled outward like waves from a stone. An elderly man in the back row, wearing a faded cap embroidered with Korea veteran, rose slowly to his feet. His knees protested, his back ached, but he stood anyway because some things demanded it. A woman in a business suit touched the small anchor pin on her lapel, her Navy service suddenly feeling very present, very real. Derek Okonkwo's hands trembled as he held his phone, capturing history, understanding that what he was recording would matter far beyond this room. Angela Reyes-Morrison stood at the defense table, her case files forgotten, her legal arguments irrelevant. She had graduated law school 14 months ago, full of idealism about justice and fairness and the system working as it should. She had watched that idealism erode case by case, ground down by overwork and underfunding in judges who saw defendants as problems to be processed rather than people to be heard. But this moment, right now, felt like something different, something that might restore a fraction of what she had lost. Pemberton finally found his voice, though it emerged thin and uncertain, stripped of the theatrical confidence that had defined his career. These claims are unverified. Anyone could scratch words into metal. Anyone could construct a story. I cannot simply accept the word of a bailiff who clearly has some personal connection to the defendant. Coleman turned to face the judge fully, the dog tags still clutched in his hands. "Sir, I was there. November 10th, 2004. I was a 19-year-old Lance Corporal who had never seen real combat, pinned behind a collapsed wall while rounds snapped over my head. I watched that tower all night. Every time a muzzle flash appeared, another enemy position went silent. I did not sleep. I did not look away, because that tower was the only thing keeping me alive." His voice broke slightly, but he pushed through. "We called him the Hangman because he hung over us like death itself. Not death for us, death for them. The enemy knew someone was up there. They tried to take him out. We heard the RPGs, heard the small arms fire directed at the tower. But he never stopped shooting. 19 hours, Your Honor. 19 hours with his spotter bleeding out beside him. When they finally extracted him, he had 4 rounds left and a bullet grazed across his temple that should have killed him." Coleman gestured at Birchwood, at the thin scar running from eyebrow toward ear. "That scar, right there, the bullet that should have ended him. But it did not, because the Hangman does not die easily. The Hangman keeps shooting until the mission is complete." Pemberton's face had lost all color. He looked like a man who had stumbled into a church expecting a town hall meeting, suddenly confronted with something sacred and terrible that his worldview had no framework to process. Birchwood remained motionless at the defendant's podium. He had not moved throughout Coleman's testimony, had not reacted to the words that painted him as a legend, a hero, something more than the broken man he knew himself to be. Because the truth was more complicated than legends allowed. The truth was that he had disobeyed orders. The truth was that Tabird had died because Birchwood had not seen the enemy sniper in time. The truth was that 46 Marines went home, but one did not, and that one had been his responsibility, his brother, his failure. The courtroom clock ticked past 10 o'clock. Somewhere in the building, another hearing was beginning, another judge dispensing another form of justice to another forgotten soul. The machinery of the legal system ground on, indifferent to the small drama unfolding in courtroom 4B. But in this room, time had stopped. Evelyn Trand finally began typing again, her fingers moving across the stenograph keys with desperate precision, trying to capture every word for a record that would be read and reread in the days to come. She thought of her father, who had served in Desert Storm, who never talked about what he had seen, who sometimes woke screaming in the night, even 30 years later. She had never understood. She was beginning to. Pemberton cleared his throat. His hand moved unconsciously to straighten his robe, a gesture of authority that now felt hollow. "Even if what you say is true, Bailiff Coleman, it does not change the facts of this case. The defendant was arrested for trespassing. The defendant broke the law. My personal feelings about his service record, verified or not, cannot influence my judgment. It was a reasonable argument, technically correct, legally sound. It was also the argument of a man grasping for solid ground as it crumbled beneath him." Coleman shook his head slowly. "With respect, Your Honor, you were not offering legal judgment. You were offering contempt. You called his dog tags props. You called him a vagrant. You demanded he remove the only connection he has to the brother who died in his arms." "Your Honor," Angela Reyes-Morrison interjected, seizing the moment. "In light of these circumstances, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges. My client is a decorated combat veteran who is seeking shelter from life-threatening cold. The library vestibule was public property. No damage was done. No threat was posed. Prosecuting this case serves no legitimate public interest." Pemberton's gavel twitched in his hand, but he did not bring it down. The gallery was watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to disgust to something approaching pity. He had built his career on being feared, on being the judge who took no excuses, who held the line against the tide of humanity that washed through his courtroom day after day. He had never considered that some of that humanity might be worth more than he could measure. He stopped. Start again. "The court requires verification of these claims before proceeding. This hearing is in recess until such time as the defendant's service record can be obtained and reviewed." He raised his gavel, prepared to end the session, to retreat to his chambers and regroup and find some way to salvage his dignity from the wreckage of the morning. But Birchwood spoke first. "You want verification, Your Honor?" His voice cut through the courtroom like a blade, quiet but carrying, impossible to ignore. Every eye turned to the defendant's podium, to the old man in the donated suit who had remained silent through his own defense, who had let others speak for him, who had stood like a statue while legends were built around him. "I can give you verification. I can give you coordinates and dates and operation names. I can give you the number of rounds I fired and the positions I eliminated and the exact time, down to the minute when Lance Corporal Terrence Washington took his last breath." He paused, and when he continued, his voice had changed. Harder, colder. The voice of after-action reports and classified briefings. The voice of a man who had seen more death than most people could imagine and had learned to speak of it with clinical precision. "Would you like to hear it, Your Honor? Would you like to know exactly what your props represent?" The courtroom held its breath. Pemberton sat motionless behind his bench, gavel suspended in midair, caught between the instinct to silence this disruption and the growing awareness that he had stumbled into something far beyond his control. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, indifferent witnesses to the drama unfolding below. Birchwood stepped forward slightly, his posture shifting in ways that only Coleman truly recognized. The slump of the homeless man straightened into something military, something precise. His shoulders squared, his chin lifted. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, like watching a blade being drawn from its sheath. November 10th, 2004. Birchwood's voice filled the courtroom, steady and cold. Coordinates: 33.3530 degrees north, 43.7823 degrees east. Jolan District, Northwest Sector, Fallujah, Al-Anbar Province, Iraq. Operation Phantom Fury, the second major assault on the city. My unit, 2nd Force Reconnaissance Company, was attached to 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines for the push through insurgent-held territory. He paused, letting the specificity of the details settle over the room. These were not the vague claims of a man seeking sympathy. These were coordinates that could be verified, dates that could be checked, unit designations that existed in official records. Kilo Company advanced along Abu Ghraib Street at approximately 0130 hours. They encountered fortified resistance from 3 overlapping machine gun positions. Crossfire from elevated positions. No clear avenue of retreat. 46 Marines pinned down with casualties mounting. Coleman's hand moved to the wall beside him, steadying himself. He remembered. God help him. He remembered every second of those hours. The sound of rounds snapping overhead. The screams of the wounded. The absolute certainty that dawn would find him dead. My commanding officer ordered all reconnaissance elements to hold position pending air support. Birchwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. ETA for air support was 4 hours. Kilo Company did not have 4 hours. They were taking fire from positions they could not see, losing men they could not save. He let the silence stretch for a moment. I identified a clock tower 600 meters northeast of the engagement zone. For stories, partially collapsed, structurally compromised. Clear sight lines to all 3 machine gun positions. I informed my CO of my intention to take the position. He ordered me to hold. I disobeyed. The word hung in the air. Disobeyed. In the military, disobedience could end a career, could result in court-martial, could mark a man forever. But sometimes disobedience was the only moral choice available. My spotter was Lance Corporal Terrence Lamar Washington, 22 years old, Detroit native, graduated top of his class at Scout Sniper School, drove a 1979 Pontiac Firebird he had restored with his father over 3 summers, planned to become a history teacher after his enlistment ended. Call signed to Bird. Birchwood's voice wavered for the first time, a hairline crack in the clinical precision. We climbed that tower at 0217 hours. Set up position on the 4th floor, northwest corner. I took the first shot at 0234. Enemy combatant operating a PCAM machine gun from a 2nd-story window for 112 meters. Said her mass. He went down, and the gun went silent. Evelyn Tran's fingers flew across her stenograph, capturing every word. Though her vision had blurred with tears, she did not bother to wipe away. In the gallery, the Korean War veteran had removed his cap and held it against his chest. The woman with the Navy anchor pin had her hand over her mouth. The enemy knew our position within the hour. Birchwood continued, his eyes fixed on some middle distance, seeing not the courtroom, but the burning city that lived forever in his memory. They directed fire at the tower. Small arms. RPGs. One rocket impacted the third floor at 0547, collapsed a section of the stairwell. Our extraction route was compromised. We were committed. He touched the scar at his temple, an unconscious gesture. I took a bullet graze at approximately 1,430 hours. Round passed within centimeters of my skull. Knocked me unconscious for approximately 90 seconds. Bird kept watch while I recovered. Then we resumed operations. Pemberton had lowered his gavel to the bench. His hands lay flat on the surface before him, as if he needed the solid wood to anchor him to reality. His face had gone from pale to gray, the expression of a man watching his own assumptions collapse into rubble. At 1847 hours, we identified enemy sniper activity from a minaret 800 meters southeast. Birchwood's voice dropped slightly, forcing everyone in the courtroom to lean forward to hear. I was engaging a target to the west. Bird was spotting, calling adjustments. He did not see the muzzle flash. The silence was absolute. Even the flickering fluorescent light seemed to pause. The round entered through the right side of his throat and exited through the left, severed the carotid artery. He turned to look at me with this expression of surprise, like he could not understand what had happened. Then the blood came. Coleman's shoulders shook. He had not known these details. No one outside the classified after-action reports had known these details. The legend of the Hangman was all heroism and impossible endurance. It did not include this. It did not include watching a brother die. I held pressure on the wound. Birchwood's voice had gone flat, mechanical, the only way to speak of such things without breaking completely. It was futile. I knew it was futile, but I tried anyway because that is what you do. You try until there is nothing left to try. He drew a breath that seemed to cost him something essential. His last words were, "Keep shooting, Gunny. Do not stop for me." The courtroom was weeping. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in the quiet way that grief manifests when it arrives, unexpected. Tears on cheeks, hands pressed to mouths, the soft sound of controlled breathing threatening to become something less controlled. So I kept shooting. Birchwood raised his eyes to meet Pemberton's gaze directly. For 3 more hours, with his body beside me, with his blood soaking through my uniform. I kept shooting because that is what he asked. That is what the mission required. That is what the 46 Marines below me needed. He held up his hands, turning them slowly so the courtroom could see. When they extracted us at 2,147 hours, I had 4 rounds remaining. My trigger finger would not straighten for a week. They had to pry my hands off the rifle, and they had to pry my arms from around his body. His hands dropped back to his sides. Those are your props, Your Honor. That is what the name Hangman represents. Not a costume, not a plea for sympathy. Just the worst night of my life. Carved in a metal, so I never forget what it cost and who paid the price. The clock on the wall ticked past 10:15. In the profound silence that followed, the only sound was the soft weeping of strangers who had entered this courtroom expecting nothing and found themselves witnesses to something they would carry forever. Judge Pemberton sat behind his bench like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. His rimless glasses had slipped down his nose, but he made no move to adjust them. His gavel lay forgotten on the wooden surface before him. His mouth opened and closed twice without producing sound, a fish drowning in air it had always taken for granted. The courtroom remained suspended in the aftermath of Birchwood's recitation. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of what they had witnessed pressed down on every person present, demanding acknowledgement, demanding response, demanding something that none of them quite knew how to give. Coleman still stood near the defendant's podium, The dog tags clutched against his chest. Tears streamed openly down his face, cutting tracks through skin that had not wept in public since childhood. He did not wipe them away. Some tears were earned. Some tears were owed. The Korean War veteran in the back row had not sat down. He stood with his cap pressed to his heart, spine straight despite his years, rendering the only tribute he knew how to give. Beside him, a young woman who had come to pay a parking ticket found herself unable to look away from the old man at the podium. This impossible figure who had walked into the courtroom as a vagrant and revealed himself to be something else entirely. Derek Okonkwo lowered his phone slowly, though the recording continued. His brother was deployed right now, somewhere he could not name, doing things their family would never fully understand. He had always been proud of Marcus, but the pride had been abstract, distant, the admiration of someone who had never seen what service truly meant. Now he understood. Now he saw. Pemberton finally found his voice. It emerged small and cracked, stripped of every pretension that had defined his decades on the bench. I cannot have known. The words trailed off into nothing because they were nothing. They were the excuse of a man who had spent 22 years judging people without ever truly seeing them, who had built a career on assumptions and contempt, who had laughed at dog tags that represented more sacrifice than he could comprehend. Birchwood looked at the judge with eyes that held no anger, no accusation, no demand for apology. Only weariness. Only the exhaustion of a man who had carried an impossible weight for 2 decades and had learned that explanations changed nothing. You cannot have known, Your Honor. He spoke quietly, the cold precision of his recitation giving way to something softer. That is true, but you could have asked. You could have considered that the man standing before you might be more than what he appeared. Instead, you assumed. You mocked. You demanded I remove the only thing I have left of my brother. He touched his chest where the dog tags had rested. I have been called many things in my life. Marine, sniper, gunnery sergeant, hangman, husband, father, and yes, in recent years, vagrant. Homeless, nuisance, system clogger, I believe, was your term earlier. Pemberton flinched at his own words thrown back at him. All of those things are true. Birchwood continued. I'm all of those things. A man could be a hero on Tuesday and a vagrant on Wednesday. The world does not sort us into neat categories. We contain multitudes, Your Honor. Every person who stands before your bench carries a story you cannot see. I'm not special. I am simply the one whose story you happen to uncover today. He turned slightly, addressing not just the judge but the entire courtroom. There are veterans on your streets, right now, who did things that would make my 19 hours look like a training exercise. Men and women who gave everything, who came home broken, who fell through the cracks of a system that does not know how to hold them. You pass them every day. You look through them like they are ghosts. And maybe some of them are ghosts. Maybe the people they used to be died overseas, and what came back is just an echo, trying to remember how to be human. The woman with the Navy anchor pin was openly sobbing now. One hand pressed her mouth, the other gripping the pew in front of her. She had served. She knew. She had been lucky enough to find her way back. But she knew others who had not. I'm not asking for special treatment. Birchwood's voice remained steady, though something beneath it threatened to crack. I broke the law. I was in that library vestibule after hours. I understand that there are rules and that rules exist for reasons. Find me. Sentence me. Do what the law requires. He paused, and when he continued, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. But do not tell me that these tags are fake. Do not tell me that my brother's blood is a costume. Do not ever tell a man to remove the last connection he has to someone who died in his arms. The words hung in the air, final and absolute. Pemberton's hands trembled against the bench. In 22 years, he had never lost control of his courtroom. He had never been challenged, never been exposed, never been forced to confront the human cost of his casual cruelties. He had dispensed justice like a machine, efficient and unfeeling, proud of his reputation as a hard judge who took no excuses. Now he sat in the ruins of that reputation, surrounded by witnesses who had seen him mock a war hero, who had watched him demand the removal of sacred objects, who would remember this morning for the rest of their lives. The word caught in his throat. He tried again. "I owe you an apology, Mr. Birchwood. What I said was inexcusable. What I assumed was unforgivable. I have no defense except ignorance, and ignorance is not a defense." It was not enough. They both knew it was not enough. No words could bridge the gap between what had been done and what should have been done. But it was something. It was a crack in the armor of a man who had never before admitted fault. Birchwood nodded slowly. "I have heard apologies before, Your Honor, from men who meant them and men who did not. Time will tell which kind yours is." He turned back to face the bench fully, the soldier reasserting itself over the vagrant, the posture straightening, the chin lifting. "Now, you said you wanted verification. You said you wanted proof. Bailiff Coleman has identified me personally as the sniper who saved his unit in Fallujah. He has confirmed the details of the operation, the location, the circumstances. Is that sufficient for the court, or do you require additional documentation?" The question was not a challenge. It was an offer, an opportunity for Pemberton to find some path forward through the wreckage of the morning. A chance to do something right. Pemberton looked at Coleman, at the tears still wet on the bailiff's face, at the dog tags held like precious relics in his trembling hands. He looked at the gallery, at the veterans standing, at the civilians weeping, at the young law student whose phone had captured everything. And for the first time in 22 years, Judge Franklin Ashworth Pemberton III did not know what to do next. The courtroom door opened with a sound that cut through the weighted silence like a blade. Every head turned toward the interruption, grateful for something to break the unbearable tension that had settled over the room. A man entered, moving with the controlled urgency of someone who has received news that cannot wait. He wore the uniform of the Hadley County Sheriff's Department, sergeant stripes on his sleeves, a folder clutched in his hand. His eyes swept the courtroom, taking in the weeping gallery, the frozen judge, the old man at the defendant's podium, before landing on Bailiff Coleman. "Marcus." The sergeant's voice was low but carried in the silence. "You need to see this. Right now." Coleman looked at the judge, at Birchwood, then back at the sergeant. He crossed the courtroom in quick strides, meeting the man near the door. A hushed conversation followed, heads bent together, the sergeant's finger pointing at something in the folder. Coleman's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, then recognition, then something approaching awe. He turned back to face the courtroom, the folder now in his hands. "Your Honor." His voice had taken on a formal quality, the weight of official proceedings. "I have just been informed that Sergeant Reeves received a call from the Hadley County Veterans Affairs office 15 minutes ago. They were contacted by a retired colonel named Patricia Shiong, formerly of the Navy Nurse Corps, who saw a social media post about this hearing and recognized the defendant's name." Pemberton leaned forward slightly, grasping at this new development like a drowning man reaches for driftwood. "And what did this colonel have to say?" Coleman opened the folder and removed several sheets of paper. "Commander Shiong served at Camp Fallujah in November 2004. She treated Marines who were extracted from the Jolin district after Operation Phantom Fury. She has provided a sworn statement, transmitted electronically and printed here, confirming that she personally treated Gunnery Sergeant Cornelius Birchwood for a bullet graze to the temple and multiple shrapnel wounds to the left shoulder on the morning of November 11th, 2004. He paused, letting the information settle. "She also confirms treating the body of Lance Corporal Terrence Washington, who arrived in the same extraction helicopter. Cause of death was listed as catastrophic damage to the carotid artery from a high-velocity round. Commander Shiong states that Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood refused to release the body until directly ordered to do so by his commanding officer." The gallery stirred. More verification, more proof. The legend becoming documented fact with every passing moment. Angela Reyes Morrison stood, her legal instincts finally catching up with events. "Your Honor, I submit that this constitutes substantial corroboration of my client's service record. Combined with Bailiff Coleman's personal testimony as a direct witness to the events in question, there can be no reasonable doubt regarding the defendant's military background." Pemberton raised a hand weakly. "Counselor, I do not think anyone in this room doubts the defendant's service at this point. Then I renew my motion for immediate dismissal of all charges. Reyes Morrison pressed forward, sensing the moment. The defendant is a decorated combat veteran who is seeking shelter from dangerous cold. The trespassing was non-destructive, non-threatening, and motivated entirely by survival necessity. Prosecution serves no public interest and would be, frankly, an embarrassment to this court and this county. Pemberton winced at the word embarrassment. He was acutely aware of Derek Okonkwo's phone in the gallery, of the recording that had captured every moment of his mockery, of the social media post that had already reached Commander Xiong and would soon reach countless others. Coleman was not finished. Your Honor, there is more. Commander Xiong also transmitted a partial copy of Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood's service record. The full record is classified, but the portions that are available include his commendations. He looked down at the papers in his hand, and when he spoke again, his voice trembled. Silver Star for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. Awarded December 2004 for actions during Operation Phantom Fury. Citation specifically mentions the clock tower engagement and credits Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood with saving the lives of 46 Marines through extraordinary heroism and disregard for his own safety. Coleman turned a page. Bronze Star with Vita Vice for valor, awarded 1993 for actions during Operation Gothic Serpent in Mogadishu, Somalia. Citation mentions the extraction of 3 wounded Army Rangers under enemy fire. Another page. Purple Heart, awarded 3 times. First for wounds received in Beirut, 1983. Second for wounds received in Mogadishu, 1993. Third for wounds received in Fallujah, 2004. The papers trembled in his hands. Additionally, Your Honor, the record indicates that Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood was recommended for the Navy Cross following the Fallujah operation, but the recommendation was downgraded to Silver Star due to the classified nature of certain aspects of the engagement. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor in recognizing combat valor. The man standing in a donated suit, accused of sleeping in a library vestibule, had been recommended for the second highest military decoration the nation could bestow. Pemberton's head dropped forward, his chin nearly touching his chest. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him with crushing force. He had mocked this man. He had called his decorations props. He had demanded he remove the tags of his dead brother. Your Honor, Birchwood's voice cut through the judge's spiral of shame. May I approach the bench? Pemberton looked up, startled by the request. It was irregular. Defendants did not approach the bench without their attorneys. But nothing about this hearing had been regular since the moment it began. You may. Birchwood walked forward slowly, his taped boots making soft sounds on the courtroom floor. He stopped at the base of the elevated bench, looking up at the judge who had spent the morning trying to humiliate him. I did not come here today seeking vindication. His voice was quiet enough that only Pemberton could hear. I did not come seeking recognition or special treatment. I came because I was arrested and I follow the law, even when the law does not make sense to me. He paused, his pale blue eyes holding Pemberton's gaze. What you did to me today was cruel. It was ignorant. It was the action of a man who has forgotten that the people standing before him are human beings with histories he cannot see. Pemberton's throat worked, but no words came. But I have seen cruelty, Your Honor. Real cruelty. The kind that ends lives and destroys families and leaves scars that never heal. What happened here today was not that. It was a small man making himself feel big by tearing down someone he saw as beneath him. I have encountered 1,000 men like you. Most of them learned nothing. A few learned everything. He let the silence stretch. The question is, which kind are you going to be? Pemberton stared down at the old man before his bench, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not the donated suit, or the taped boots, or the hollow cheeks carved by hunger. Not the vagrant, or the nuisance, or the system clogger. Just a man. A man who had given everything and asked for nothing and been repaid with mockery by someone who had never sacrificed anything more significant than a tea time. The judge's hand moved to his gavel. then stopped. What was there to say? What ruling could he offer that would mean anything after what had transpired? The law seemed suddenly small, a collection of rules designed for ordinary circumstances, utterly inadequate for the moment before him. Case dismissed. The words came out hoarse, barely audible. He cleared his throat and tried again. Case number 2024 MT0847. People versus Birchwood. All charges dismissed. The court finds that prosecution would serve no legitimate public interest and would constitute a miscarriage of justice. Angela Reyes Morrison exhaled sharply, relief flooding her features. She had won cases before, but never like this. Never with the feeling that the entire machinery of justice had been exposed as inadequate and transformed into something more human in the span of a single morning. Pemberton was not finished. His hands gripped the edge of his bench, knuckles white with the effort of what he was about to do. Furthermore, the court wishes to offer a formal apology to Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood. My conduct this morning was unbecoming of this office, unworthy of this court, and unforgivable in its assumptions and cruelty. I mocked a hero. I demanded the removal of sacred objects. I treated a man who served his country with extraordinary valor as though he were beneath contempt. His voice cracked, but he pushed through. There is no excuse. Ignorance is not an excuse. The pressures of this job are not an excuse. The 1,000 defendants who have stood where you are standing and lied to me are not an excuse. I should have asked before I assumed. I should have listened before I judged. I failed in the most basic duty of this position, which is to see the human being before me, not just the charges against them. The gallery sat in stunned silence. Judges did not apologize. Judges did not admit fault. Judges certainly did not weep from the bench, which Pemberton was now doing, tears cutting tracks down cheeks that had not known public emotion in decades. Birchwood stood motionless, receiving the apology without visible reaction. He had learned long ago that words were easy. Anyone could apologize. The test was what came after. Coleman approached slowly, the dog tag still in his hands. He held them out to Birchwood with the reverence of a priest offering communion. "Gunny." His voice was rough with emotion. "These belong with you." Birchwood took the tags, feeling the familiar weight settle into his palm. His own tags, scratched with the name that had defined the worst and best night of his life. To Bird's tags, stained with blood that no amount of time would ever fully erase. He lifted them over his head and let them fall against his chest, where they had rested for 20 years, where they would rest until the day he died. "Thank you, Lance Corporal." Coleman shook his head. "No, Gunny. Thank you. For that night. For every night since that I have been alive because of what you did. I have a wife. I have 2 kids. I have a life that exists only because you climbed that tower and would not come down." He came to attention and rendered a salute so crisp it could have been on a parade ground. "Gunnery Sergeant Cornelius Birchwood, United States Marine Corps. On behalf of the 46 Marines of Kilo Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, I salute you. We never forgot. We never stopped telling the story. And I am sorry it took 20 years for any of us to find you and say thank you." Birchwood returned the salute, his hand moving with the automatic precision of decades of service. The gesture felt strange, foreign, like putting on clothes that no longer quite fit. He had not saluted anyone in years. He had not felt worthy of the gesture. But here, in this courtroom, surrounded by witnesses who had seen him at his lowest and learned of him at his highest, something shifted. Some wall inside him cracked just slightly, just enough to let a fragment of light through. The Korean War veteran in the back row saluted as well, his aged arm trembling but steady. The woman with the Navy anchor pin rose to her feet and saluted, tears streaming down her face. One by one, others in the gallery who had served, who had worn the uniform, who understood what it meant, rose and rendered the same tribute. Derek Okonkwo did not salute. He had not served, but he stood, his phone still recording, bearing witness to something he knew he would remember for the rest of his life. Birchwood looked at them, these strangers who had stumbled into his humiliation and stayed for his vindication. He did not know what to say. He had never known what to say when people tried to make him into something more than what he was. A man who had done his job. A man who had failed to save his brother. A man who had come home broken and kept breaking until there was nothing left but fragments held together by routine and ritual and the daily pilgrimage to a name on a wall. At ease. The words came out automatically. The command of a man who had led Marines in combat, who had trained snipers, who had been someone before the world took everything and left only this shell. The salutes dropped. The moment passed. But something had changed in the air of courtroom 4B. Some fundamental alteration in the way these people saw the world and the broken souls who moved through it. Pemberton cleared his throat, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked diminished behind his bench, the black robe that had seemed so imposing now hanging on him like a costume he no longer deserved to wear. Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood, this court is adjourned. You're free to go, and for whatever it is worth, I give you my word that I will never again assume I know someone's story by looking at their circumstances. Birchwood nodded slowly. Then make it worth something, Your Honor. The next homeless veteran who stands before your bench, the next broken soul who cannot afford a lawyer or a suit that fits. Remember this morning. Remember that you do not know what they have given. Remember that you cannot see the weight they carry. He turned and walked toward the courtroom door, his taped boots making soft sounds on the floor. Remember that props can be real, and legends can end up sleeping in library doorways. Birchwood did not make it to the courtroom door. He had taken perhaps 10 steps when the first person intercepted him, the Korean War veteran, moving with the determined shuffle of a man whose body had aged but whose spirit refused to yield. He blocked Birchwood's path, not aggressively, but with the immovable certainty of someone who had something to say and would not be denied. So, the old man's voice was gravel and smoke, decades of cigarettes and shouted commands layered into every syllable. I was at Chosin Reservoir. Winter of 1950. Coldest I have ever been, before or since. We lost good men to the weather before the Chinese even got to us. Birchwood stopped, recognizing a fellow traveler on a road that had no end. I know what it is to hold a position when everything tells you to run. The Korean War veteran extended his hand. I know what it costs. You did good, Marine. You did real good. Birchwood took the offered hand. The grip was weak with age, but firm with intention. Two men, separated by 50 years and different wars, connected by the same essential experience. The weight of duty, the price of survival. Thank you, sir. The veteran nodded once, sharply, then stepped aside. But before Birchwood could continue, the woman with the navy anchor pin was there, her eyes red from crying, her hand outstretched. I served on the Mercy hospital ship. She spoke quickly, as if afraid he might disappear before she finished. We received casualties from Fallujah. I never knew who was up in those towers, keeping our Marines alive long enough to reach us. Now I know, at least one of them. Behind her, others were gathering. The morning's docket had been suspended, the other defendants and witnesses and family members all drawn into the orbit of what had happened. Word had spread through the courthouse with the speed of wildfire. A homeless veteran, a judge's cruelty, a revelation that had left the courtroom in tears. Angela Riz Morrison appeared at his elbow, her legal pad clutched to her chest. Gunnery Sergeant, I want you to know that I'm going to file a formal complaint with the Judicial Review Board regarding Judge Pemberton's conduct. What he did to you was unconscionable, and there should be consequences. Birchwood shook his head slowly. Let go, counselor. She blinked, surprised. But what he did, the mockery, the demands, the public humiliation, you have every right to seek accountability. I have spent my life seeking accountability. Birchwood's voice was tired but not bitter. Accountability for enemies who kill my brothers. Accountability for systems that fail my family. Accountability for a God who took my wife and left me here to wonder why. At some point, you realize that accountability is just another word for revenge, and revenge is a fire that consumes the one who feeds it. He looked back at the courtroom, at Pemberton still sitting behind his bench, diminished and exposed. That man will carry this mourning for the rest of his life. Every time he looks at a homeless defendant, he will remember. That is enough. That has to be enough. Reyes Morrison opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. She was young. She still believed that systems could be reformed through proper channels. Birchwood had lived long enough to know that real change happened in individual hearts, one moment of recognition at a time. Derek Okonkwo pushed through the gathering crowd, his phone finally lowered. "Sir, I want you to know that I recorded everything. My brother is deployed right now, and I want to send this to him. I wanted to know that people back home see veterans, really see them. Would that be okay?" Birchwood studied the young man's face. Earnest, hopeful, completely unaware of what he had captured and what it would become. "Your brother. What branch?" "Marines, sir. Second deployment. He does not talk about it much, but I know it is hard on him. When he comes home," Birchwood said quietly, "do not ask him to talk. Just be there. Make him dinner. Watch football. Let him know that the world kept turning while he was gone and that there is still a place in it for him. That is what he will need. Not questions, not demands for stories, just presence." Derek nodded, absorbing the words with the gravity they deserved. "Yes, sir. I will remember that." The crowd continued to grow. Courthouse employees emerging from offices. Attorneys pausing between hearings. Security guards who had heard fragments of what happened and come to see for themselves. Birchwood found himself surrounded by faces he did not know, hands reaching out to touch his arm or pat his shoulder, voices offering thanks and blessings and promises of help. It was too much. The attention, the gratitude, the sudden visibility after years of invisibility. He felt the walls closing in, the familiar panic rising in his chest, the desperate need to escape to somewhere quiet and empty where no one would look at him. No one would expect anything. No one would see the broken places he kept hidden beneath the surface. Coleman appeared beside him, reading the distress in his posture with the ease of a fellow veteran. He positioned himself between Birchwood and the crowd, creating a buffer of space. "All right, folks, let us give the gunny some room. He has had a long morning, and I am sure he would appreciate a chance to catch his breath." The crowd reluctantly parted, creating a path to the door. Birchwood moved through it with Coleman at his side, a protective escort he had not asked for but desperately needed. They emerged into the courthouse lobby, then through the main doors into the gray morning light. The air was cold, sharp with the promise of more winter to come, but after the suffocating intensity of the courtroom, it felt like freedom. Birchwood stopped on the courthouse steps, breathing deeply, letting the chill fill his lungs. The Veterans Memorial was visible across the plaza, the black granite walls catching what little light filtered through the overcast sky. Tabird's name was there, waiting for him, as it waited every morning. "Gunny." Coleman's voice was hesitant. "What will you do now? Where will you go?" Birchwood looked at the memorial, at the flags hanging limp, at the bench where he sat every morning, communing with the dead. "Same thing I do every day, Lance Corporal. Same thing I have done for 3 years. I will go talk to my brother. I will tell him what happened, and then I will figure out how to survive until tomorrow." Coleman's face crumpled with a pain he could not hide. "Gunny, you cannot keep living under a bridge. You cannot keep surviving on nothing. Please, let me help. Let someone help." Birchwood turned to look at the man whose life he had saved 20 years ago, now standing before him with tears in his eyes, begging for the chance to repay a debt that could never be repaid. And for the first time in 3 years, he did not immediately refuse. 3 days passed. Derek Okonkwo's video spread across the internet like wildfire through dry brush. He had uploaded it that evening with a simple caption, "Judge Mock's homeless veterans call sign. Watch what happens next." By morning, it had 50,000 views. By noon, 500,000. By the end of the second day, it had crossed 3 million and showed no signs of slowing. The comments poured in from around the world. Veterans sharing their own stories of invisibility and disrespect. Family members weeping at their screens. Strangers demanding accountability for Judge Pemberton. Demanding recognition for Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood. Demanding that someone do something to help this man who had given everything and received nothing in return. News outlets picked up the story. Local affiliates first, then national networks. The Hangman of Fallujah became a headline, a hashtag, a symbol of everything wrong with how America treated its veterans and everything right about the human capacity for grace under fire. Pemberton resigned on the second day. His statement was brief and broken, acknowledging his failures, accepting responsibility, promising to dedicate himself to veteran causes as penance for what he had done. Whether he meant it remained to be seen. But his career on the bench was over, ended by a single morning of cruelty that the internet would never forget. Birchwood knew none of this. He had returned to his spot beneath the Meridian Street overpass, to the routine that had sustained him through 3 years of emptiness. Wake at 0545. Fold a blanket. Walk to the memorial. Speak with Tabord. Find food. Find shelter from the cold. Survive until tomorrow. Repeat. But on the third morning, when he arrived at the memorial at 0600, someone was waiting for him. She sat on his bench, the bench he had claimed through years of daily presence. A woman in her late 50s, Asian features framed by silver-streaked black hair, pulled back in a practical knot. She wore civilian clothes, but something in her posture spoke of decades in uniform. She did not rise when he approached. She simply watched him with eyes that had seen their own share of suffering. Gunnery Sergeant Birchwood. Her voice was calm, unhurried. I am Patricia Xiong, Commander, Navy Nurse Corps, retired. I treated you at Camp Fallujah 20 years ago. Birchwood stopped a few feet from the bench, uncertain. He did not remember her. The hours after extraction were a blur of pain and sedation and the desperate grip of hands trying to pull Tabird's body from his arms. I sent the documentation to the courthouse. Xiong continued. Your service record. My sworn statement. I thought you should know that it was me. And I thought you should know why I am here. She gestured to the empty space beside her on the bench. Sit with me, please. I have something to say, and I would prefer not to say to a man who is standing at attention like he expects to be court-martialed. Birchwood hesitated, then lowered himself onto the bench. The granite was cold through his thin pants. Tabird's name gleamed on the wall before them, catching the first pale light of dawn. I run a program now. Xiong's eyes remained fixed on the memorial. Second watch, I call it. 4 combat veterans who fell through the cracks. Men and women who came home broken and found that the systems designed to help them could not hold them. It is not the VA. There is no paperwork, no bureaucracy, no hoops to jump through. Just a place where people who have seen what you have seen can exist without having to explain themselves. Birchwood said nothing. He had heard pitches like this before. Social workers, outreach coordinators, well-meaning civilians who thought a hot meal and a pamphlet could fix what was broken inside him. I'm not here to save you. Xiong turned to look at him directly. I do not believe in saving people. I believe in walking beside them while they figure out how to save themselves. I am here because I saw that video, and I recognized the operation you described, and I remembered a young gunnery sergeant who would not let go of his spotter's body until we sedated him. Her voice softened. I am here because you have been punishing yourself for 20 years, and I think Terrence Washington would be furious about that. The name hit Birchwood like a physical blow. He turned away, jaw tight, hands clenched against his thighs. You did not know him. No, but I know you. I know what survivor's guilt looks like. I know how it convinces you that you do not deserve warmth or food or help or love. I know how it whispers that the best thing you can do for the people who care about you is disappear. She paused, letting the words settle. There's a bed at second watch if you want it. A roof. Meals. People who understand. No pressure, no expectations. You show up or you do not. The door stays open either way. Birchwood stared at Tabird's name, carved into black granite, permanent and unchanging. He came here every day to apologize, to promise that he was still trying, to confess that he did not know how much longer he could keep going. I have a daughter. The word surprised him. He had not meant to say them. Xiong waited silent. Marisol, she's a nurse like you. She has children, I think. Grandchildren I have never met. I left her 3 years ago, after her mother died. I cannot look at her without seeing my wife. I cannot stay in that house with all those memories. So I wrote a note and disappeared, and I have been watching her from a distance ever since, too ashamed to let her know I am still alive. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked me to save myself. Birchwood's voice cracked. I do not know if I can. I do not know if there is enough left of me to be worth saving. But if there is, it is because somewhere out there, my daughter is living a life I helped create, and maybe she would want to know that her father did not die under a bridge. Xiong reached into her jacket and withdrew a phone. She held it out to him. She has been looking for you since the video went viral. She has called every veterans organization in the state. She has posted on every social media platform. She drove 4 hours yesterday to check a homeless camp in Riverside because someone thought they saw you there. Birchwood stared at the phone like it might bite him. Your daughter wants you back, Gunnery Sergeant. Not the legend. Not the hangman. Just her father. The question is whether you are brave enough to let her find you. The phone sat in Xiong's outstretched hand, waiting. The memorial wall gleamed in the growing light. Tabird's name watched over them both, silent witness to a moment that would determine whether Cornelius Birchwood continued to survive or finally began to live. He reached out. He took the phone, and with trembling fingers, he dialed his daughter's number for the first time in 3 years. 6 weeks later, the spare bedroom in Marisol's house still did not feel real. Birchwood woke at 0545. Same as always, his body clock immune to the softness of an actual mattress, the warmth of actual blankets, the silence of a house that did not echo with traffic and sirens and the coughing of other broken men. He lay still for a moment, orienting himself to a world that had shifted so dramatically he sometimes wondered if he had died under that bridge, and this was some kind of afterlife he did not deserve. The call had lasted 11 seconds. Marisol had answered on the second ring, breathless, desperate, her voice cracking on a single word. Dad? He had not been able to speak. 3 years of silence, 3 years of watching from shadows, 3 years of convincing himself that his absence was a gift rather than an abandonment. And when the moment came, his throat had closed around everything he wanted to say. She had done the talking, told him she had seen the video, told him she had been searching since the day he disappeared, told him that she did not want an apology or an explanation or a promise that he would never leave again. She just wanted her father back, whatever was left of him, whatever pieces remained. She had driven through the night, arrived at the memorial just as the sun cleared the horizon. Still in her scrubs from shift, she had walked out of the moment she got his call. Birchwood had watched her park, watched her run across the plaza, watched her stop 10 feet away with her mother's eyes filling with tears. He had tried to apologize. She had not let him. We have time for that later, she had said. Right now, I just need to hold you. And she had, right there in the plaza, in front of Commander Xiong and Mr. Pham and the early morning joggers who pretended not to stare. She had wrapped her arms around her father and held on like she would never let go. And he had felt something break inside him, some dam that had held back everything he refused to feel for 20 years. And for the first time since Tabird died in his arms, Cornelius Birchwood had wept. Now he rose from the bed that was his, in the room that was his, in the house where his daughter and her husband and his grandchildren lived. 2 grandchildren, a girl named Lorraine, 8 years old, who had her grandmother's smile and her grandfather's stubborn streak. A boy named Terrence, 6 years old, named for an uncle he would never meet, for a man who had died on a tower in Fallujah so that others might live. Birchwood had wept again when Marisol told him about the name, had wept when little Terrence asked if Grandpa was the one from the story, the one who stayed in the tower, had wept when the boy crawled in his lap and said that he wanted to be brave like Grandpa when he grew up. He still visited the memorial, but not every day. Some mornings he went to second watch instead, where Commander Xiong had put him to work talking with new arrivals, men and women fresh from the streets, hollow-eyed and hopeless, certain that they had fallen too far to ever climb back. He told them his story, not the legend, not the hangman, but the truth. The years under the bridge, the shame that had kept him from his daughter. The morning in the courtroom when a judge's cruelty had somehow cracked him open and let the light back in. I was you, he told them. I lived in the dark for 3 years because I thought I did not deserve the light. I thought the best thing I could do for the people who loved me was disappear. I was wrong. And if I can come back, so can you. Some of them listened. Some of them did not. But the ones who did, the ones who found their way back from the edge, they remembered the old Marine with the steady hands and the pale blue eyes who had looked at them without judgment and said, "You are not too broken. No one is too broken." Coleman came by on Sundays. He and Birchwood sat on the back porch and drank coffee and watched the children play in the yard. They did not talk about Fallujah. They did not need to. They had both been there. They both carried it. That was enough. Sometimes Coleman brought his own kids, teenagers now, and Birchwood watched them chase Lorraine and Terrence around the garden, laughing and shouting and completely unaware of the impossible chain of events that had led to this moment. A tower in a burning city, a sniper who would not stop shooting, a bailiff who recognized a legend, a judge whose cruelty had sparked a reckoning. Pemberton had kept his word. He volunteered at a veterans' shelter 3 days a week now, serving meals and sorting donations and slowly, painfully learning to see the human beings he had spent decades dismissing. Birchwood had not spoken to him since the courtroom, but Marisol showed him the articles sometimes. The former judge who had become an advocate, the man who had mocked a hero and been transformed by his own shame. Birchwood did not know if Pemberton's redemption was genuine. He hoped it was. Everyone deserved the chance to become better than their worst moment. On a clear evening in late spring, Birchwood took Lorraine and Terrence into the backyard. The stars were emerging, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky, the same stars that had watched over him in Beirut and Kuwait and Mogadishu and Fallujah. He pointed upward, his granddaughter on one side, his grandson on the other. "You see that bright one? That is Polaris, the North Star. Sailors have used it to find their way home for thousands of years." "Did you use it, Grandpa?" Terrence asked. "When you were far away." Birchwood smiled. It still felt strange smiling, but it was getting easier. "Every night, every time I looked at that star, I thought about the people waiting for me back home. Your grandmother, your mother. That is what kept me going, even when everything else was dark." Marisol watched from the kitchen window, tears streaming down her face. Her husband stood beside her, his arm around her waist, understanding without words that this moment was sacred, that something broken was being healed, that the father she had lost was finally, truly home. Lorraine took her grandfather's hand. "I'm glad you found your way back, Grandpa." Birchwood squeezed her fingers, feeling the warmth of her small hand in his, feeling the weight of Tabird's tags against his chest, feeling for the first time in 20 years that perhaps survival was not a betrayal. Perhaps it was the mission all along. "Me too, sweetheart." He looked up at Polaris, steady and unchanging, the same star that had guided lost souls home since the beginning of time. "Me too." If this story moved you, if it reminded you that second chances are possible and that heroes walk among us in the most unexpected forms, please subscribe to this channel. Right now on your screen, you will see another incredible story waiting for you. Click it, watch it, and remember that every person you pass on the street carries a history you cannot see. Some of them might be legends. Some of them might be lost. And some of them might just be waiting for someone to look past the surface and see who they really are. Thank you for watching.